This is Tori. She fell in love with Travis and Ethan and Mark and Chris. Their four-way relationship is working wonders for them.
The relationship could best be described by having Tori as the hub and all of us are spokes on a giant wheel.
But not everyone understands the dynamic.
I was like, oh, you're kidding, that you're joking.
How will this poly relationship cope with a further addition to the family?
Jacksonville man jailed an abuse of 5-week-old baby. Ethan Balcom is charged with aggravated child abuse after a 5-week-old girl suffered multiple injuries, police said. The investigation began on March 15th when officers were called to Wolfson's Children's Hospital about a baby with broken ribs, injuries to her lungs and liver, and, quote, multiple brain bleeds, the arrest report said. The First Coast Child Protection Team's examination concluded that the baby had been physically abused with, quote, a minimum of 3 attacks. Balcom told the responding detective that he was getting frustrated due to his inability to get any sleep while babysitting. At some point, something happened that was blacked out in the report, and that's when he said he heard the pop. Then the baby briefly ceased crying, then cried harder, he said. Yeah, let's get into this so we can figure out exactly how something like this could happen to an infant in such a normal and caring environment, so stay tuned.
John Doyle in. Heck off, Commie.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Heck Off, Commie. You know what my favorite thing in the world is? I bet you do, because I talk about it quite often. My favorite thing in the world is children growing up in a nuclear family. And conversely, my least favorite thing in the world is anything that attempts to pervert that or to compromise that, such as this. And we'll get into the reasons why. We'll get into some of the child abuse statistics, all of that stuff. But I do have to promise that at some point, we will release one huge video that goes through all of the reasons why the traditional nuclear family is so important. And I know that we tend to address specific aspects of it in isolation from time to time, but at some point, we'll cover the whole thing. But for now, it's called the nuclear family, which just comes from the Latin nucleus, which just means core. And it's not just the core of the family, because of course, you have your extended family, but it's also the core of society. And Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of the UK throughout the 1980s, she had a really good line about this. She said that there's no such thing as society. There are only individual men and women and families. And from there, I would add that individual men and women are sons and daughters and maybe brothers and sisters and also potential husbands and wives and fathers and mothers. But the nuclear family, which is just a mother and a father and their children living together, that's the core of society. Like without an intact family structure, the society will destabilize. It's happened throughout history. And it's happening to us right now. Frankly, Karl Marx wanted to abolish the family structure because he knew that that was the only way to achieve something like communism. You look at feminists, and by the way, feminism is rooted in both Marxism and Freudian psychology, and they're still talking about doing this today. They want to dismantle the family structure because they believe that it is necessary to liberate the society and create a leftist collectivist utopia. But if you look at the consequences of dismantling the family structure, which we've been experimenting with in the West for the last 60 years, literally just imagine any metric that you would use to measure societal well-being, anything from the rates of drug abuse to high school dropout rates to average income. It's all substantially worse without a stable family structure because kids need both of their parents. And again, this will be addressed in the mega video that we do at some point about this. But for now, I just want to say this to anyone watching who maybe considers themselves to be fiscally conservative but socially liberal. You're not really too concerned about what people do as long as they don't try to raise your taxes or bring in big government. I get that because I was there too for a while, quite a while actually. But I'll tell you what changed my mind because it might be something to think about. And that's that things like this, things that not only directly put children in danger, as we'll talk about, but anything that serves to pervert the cultural perception of the integrity and importance of the nuclear family will, in the long run, further disintegrate the nuclear family, which will, as we've seen, further destabilize the society. And when the society is destabilized, people crave stability. So what do? They vote for big government to come give them that stability. You look at the last 60 years of American government, you look at the degree to which it's expanded, that all happened effectively because people voted for it to happen. And not at all a coincidence is that in that same period of time, the family structure in this country collapsed to become one of the worst in the world. So I am telling you this, I am pleading with you with tears in my eyes. If you don't want big government, then you have to preserve the family unit at all costs. The family is the backbone of the society. And without that to hold up the society, something else is going to have to come assume its role as the backbone. And that's going to be big government. I guarantee you that. And they know that. So when you see them putting videos out like this, with the fun stock music in the background, it's all happy. Understand that they're trying to normalize this and understand that that will directly affect you and your family and your country. So anyways, we will go through some more of the video and then report, the report of what happened to the baby at the hands of these people. She ended up suffering a broken arm, a broken leg, broken ribs, and skull fractures. And the report alleges that only one person is responsible for the physical abuse of this child. But I would make the argument that to try to raise a child in this type of environment is a form of negligence, like in itself, which bears some responsibility, frankly. But, we'll get to that in a second. I'm going to play clips from the video, not all of it, but I think that they're important to see because they provide the context for what we're talking about. And also they demonstrate exactly what types of things that they're trying to normalize. So we will go through that now.
And so who's the father of the baby?
Alright, so then this is mine and Travis's room. This is the master bedroom. This is the room that has the bigger bed that people will swap in and out of every night just so that everyone can get equal turns, sharing a bed. While this is like mine and Travis's room, we keep all of our stuff in here. People are rotating in and out.
A couple things to note. Did you see how they put that little graphic up like, love, don't judge? That's because they want to construct this false dichotomy of either you love them or you're judging them. There's no other options. And the logical conclusion of that false dichotomy is that if you are not completely and totally accepting of everything that they do, well, then you can't love them. So in order to love them, you have to be completely and totally accepting of everything that they do. This is pure leftist doctrine. We are spoon-fed this throughout all of our media. Our kids are learning it now in school, so we got that going for us. But the truth is that not only is it okay for you to judge people, you actually should judge people. The left will tell you otherwise because since they've destroyed any concept of actual morality, the only way that you can be moral in their eyes is to be accepting and to be tolerant. And the opposite of that, the cardinal sin of leftism, would just be being judgmental. But the truth is that when we judge someone, we're not making a moral declaration on them as a person. I'm not pointing my finger at you and saying, you are no good, you are lesser than. Like, no, I'm not judging you, I'm judging your actions. And we have to judge the actions of other people because if we don't, if we just let everything fly, then civilized society cannot and will not be maintained. And they don't actually believe this in principle, by the way. They're just using it because it makes for a nice bumper sticker and it helps them forward their political agenda. But if a babysitter showed up at their door with like track marks on their arm, they would be judged and they would be turned to, no, that's not a good example. They would probably just want to give them like a new supply of needles to use, right? That's what they want to do now. And also, this example just isn't really good for what I'm trying to say because we're talking about a mother who thought that living with 4 men who all have jealousy issues and are playing the role of dad was like a good idea. So we're not going to pretend that she has the competence to consider the well-being of her child, but a Trump hat, like if the babysitter showed up in a MAGA hat, they would be judged and turned away. But that's the other thing that I wanted to mention. And they're going to talk about this more in a second, but the jealousy issues. These men are all jealous of each other. That's why she specified that they literally have to rotate to ensure equal time. That is inherently unstable. They're literally rationing this woman because that's the thing. It's not 5 people all like dating each other. It's one woman dating 4 men who are all sharing her. It sounds like a recipe for disaster. So let's find out what happens next.
The first polyamorous relationship I had been in was actually with Travis and Ethan. Travis was the one who had brought up the idea to me. We met back in elementary school. We've been dating for about 2.5, almost 3 years. I've known Ethan since junior high, and we made things official recently, but we've basically been dating for about 2 years now.
The term poly, meaning multiple, often refers to a 3-person relationship, but for these guys, it's Tori and her 4 separate lovers.
And the next one would be Mark. We met in high school. And then Chris is the newest addition. We've been dating since April.
The relationship could best be described by having Tori as the hub and all of us are spokes on a giant wheel.
Literally, I cannot imagine being any one of these people. Like, you've got 4 far below average looking men competing for the attention of one far below average looking woman. And looks aren't everything, but you can tell by the way that they're groomed and also by the fact that they're involved in something like this in the first place that these people are weird. And when the left talks about this stuff, they always like to glamorize it like, oh, it's these 2 really hot girls and these 2 really hot guys and they're just all living together and they love each other so much, but that's never actually the case. It's always just a bunch of weird, unattractive people with jealousy issues because of other weird, unattractive people. And I don't think that I could even do this if they were normal. Like if the girl were Emma Watson and it was me and like Mitchell Musso and like Kevin Durant, maybe throw on Luke Combs if he's not busy. Like that's an all-star lineup and I still don't think that I'd be in for that. Like I wake up every morning confident in the fact that I can never be happy because I'm either not dating Hermione or I am dating her and she's a feminist that thinks Planned Parenthood is epic, or I'm dating her but I have to compete for attention with frickin' Mitchell Musso, Kevin Durant, and Luke Combs, his schedule permitting, He's actually been doing quite well recently, so I might not even have to worry about him being there. But at the same time, I feel as though he'd be like probably my best ally in this situation. So I don't know. I'm still doing the math on the whole thing. But that aside, with the jealousy issues that they're experiencing, that seems to be indicative of the underlying problem with the whole structure. Because if you look at the definition of what they're doing, it's defined as the practice of or desire for intimate relationships with more than one partner. But we all know that if these guys could kick each other to the curb and just be monogamous with the girl, like they'd do it in a heartbeat. At least 2 of the guys would be gone, because I guess it was originally like 2 of them and then 1 girl and not like 5 total, but they don't want to be attention rationing. They don't want their attention ration to be increasingly divided. And to me, that implies a monogamous desire, because if you want as much of someone's romantic attention as you can get, the logical conclusion of that would be monogamy. Anything else seems to basically be a coat so that you can do weird stuff with each other to gratify your weird physical desires at the expense of your emotional well-being.
Honestly, I would love it if somebody found a second partner. You know, dividing time between all 5 people and making sure everyone feels included is kind of difficult.
But there are problems when 4 men are vying for just one woman's attention.
How often do you experience jealousy in the relationship?
Regretfully, a lot of the time. But, thankfully, there are a couple of healthy ways to deal with it. Primarily just talking to each other.
We have a tendency to talk around the moment of, hey, I need some time with Tori, rather than actually saying it outright.
Yeah.
But introvert, extrovert, introvert.
Yeah.
So only 2 of us are actually any good at open communication. It helps if you know the person. An example, seeing her with Ethan, a lot easier because I was friends with him. Her and Chris was a bit dicier at first. There was a lot more jealousy, and I'll openly admit that. The same goes for Mark, because I'd never interacted with them.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to nay that.
I know your name.
But for me personally, yeah. I've never been with the idea of monogamy, so I've always looked for a polyamorous relationship.
So, would you ever consider a romantic relationship with each other?
I don't really know, to be honest. I guess I'm open to it, but I'm not going to go after it. I know Ethan and I sort of tried back in high school, and that kind of flopped really fast.
So yeah, they're just describing in greater detail the jealousy issues that we already addressed. But the most important part in that clip, and probably the whole video, is that when the guy asks about jealousy, it's silent. And then the first person to speak up is Ethan. Ethan is the person who abused the child. Ethan is the person who fractured the child's skull, broke her ribs, broke one of her arms, and broke one of her legs. Why did Ethan do this? Did the baby create a self-defense situation? No. The baby did that thing that babies do, which is make noise. So Ethan decided to react by physically abusing the child. And by the way, as we'll find out, it's not his child. It's the child of the newest member of the relationship, who everyone is jealous of. So now factor that in. You're already jealous of the other guys. Now, a new guy shows up, he gets the girl pregnant. He hasn't done the time that you have. Why does he get to get her pregnant? Like, this was meant to implode from the beginning. Did you see how awkward and hesitant they were about it? How they said that, well, you know, we're not really good at communicating about it. Yeah, we kind of beat around the bush a little bit. That's not because the feelings aren't there. It's because they don't know how to communicate them because they're weird. So when things finally snap, something like this happens.
So I am currently about 23, 24 weeks pregnant. We found out a couple weeks ago that we're having a girl. We're very excited.
And so who's the father of the baby?
So Chris is the biological father. We just know that because of timing. But as far as, I guess, socially goes, we're all raising the baby together, so everyone's dad.
So Chris, how do you feel about everyone operating the role of dad?
It's definitely a little interesting. I mean, I grew up with the idea of, one dad, one mom. But there's a lot of support between all of us dads. We always joke about the idea of getting stuck in an endless loop of go ask your dad.
Damn, Chris. Okay, Chris. Yo, Chris a pimp. Chris walked up in the house, new kid on the block, and he got the job done. And you can tell by the looks on their faces, like they are visibly upset about the fact that he's having a kid with her. And I also love how when he was asked about what it's like with so many people, he was just like, well, you know, it's interesting. I was always used to the idea of one mom and one dad. Yeah, you and almost everything that has ever existed on the face of the planet. It is literally impossible to have more than one mother and more than one father. There's no such thing as an unusual family structure, which is what they're calling this, by the way. There's only an actual family structure, and then something like this, which could be reduced to a family structure if like 3 people were removed. Family as a definition. The whole point of definitions is that they include some things and they exclude other things. And what you're doing is not a family by definition.
Having an unusual relationship structure has meant they've all received judgment in different forms.
Polyamory is definitely an uncommon thing. A lot of people have grown up in monogamy culture of, you know, you don't really love someone if you have eyes for somebody else.
Okay, we're done with that now. Do you like how the music got all sad? Like, people judge us for being 4 men sharing 1 woman, and that makes us sad. Also, I really like how she used the phrase monogamy culture, which is basically the idea that monogamy is a harmful social construct that doesn't work. So instead, she's opted into a 5-person relationship that's inherently toxic because there's 4 men competing for the attention of 1 woman. It's almost as if human beings have a monogamous instinct or something. And don't you dare laugh at that, because whether you look at it from a theological perspective, wherein men and women were created to be united in one flesh, to be procreative and raise children together, or an evolutionary perspective wherein monogamy is the best way for men to ensure their paternity and for women to have necessary resources provided to them. It's true, and both can explain sexual desire within that as well. The evolutionary perspective would tell you that men want to spread their genes as much as they can. However, again, it also acknowledges that propagation advantages were enjoyed by men who were monogamous because their paternity was ensured. And the theological perspective would tell you that sexual desire was a gift to human beings created by God to unify man and woman in a beautiful display within the context of marriage. And since Satan exists to destroy everything good, he exploits that desire to tempt you into gratifying that desire outside of that context, whether it's through porn or through premarital sex, because he knows that he's ruining your chances of truly experiencing God's gift while also drawing you away from God and into his grasp. Much to consider, young men, but that's the other part of it. She says that monogamy means that, you know, you don't really love someone if you have eyes for someone else. And that's why they can get away with saying, like, human beings aren't monogamous, because we're still attracted to other people, even if we're with someone. And this country has basically lost the understanding of like what actual monogamy is. And so we hear that, we have no answer for it. So it's just like, okay, yeah, sure. And then it's allowed to propagate. There's more to love than just feelings. There's more to monogamy than just feelings. It's very revealing that our culture considers the emotional sensation of love to be like the essence of monogamy or marriage or even commitment in general. Like, this is partially how we ended up with such a high divorce rate and weird relationship types like this being normalized. And part of this can be blamed on the church for how they've allowed the institution of marriage to crumble, but that's for another time. The point is that if you love each other, that's great. But the point of marriage, which is the goal and conclusion of monogamy, isn't just let's stay in love forever. No, it's about commitment. It's about procreation. It's indissoluble. It's the choice to remain loyal to each other, to remain one together for the sake of one another and your children. And so, yeah, if your relationship isn't ordered towards family and commitment, and it's only about like how you feel, there's no need for structure because, you know, maybe it feels good to add more people. Maybe it feels good to raise a kid with 2 dads or 4 dads. That's the core of the left, by the way. It can be summed up with, if it feels good, do it. Very little is excluded from that description. And I'd even argue that to love someone, like to truly love someone, is what that is. It's not just, oh, you get butterflies in your stomach when you see them. No, to love someone is to be committed to them, and to be committed to someone in that context, by definition, means that they are your priority and that they're not competing for your attention. So no, we're not going to pretend that what these people have is love, let alone a family. I'm sure they're quite fond of each other, or, you know, at least the guys are of the woman. And I bet they even have fun together from time to time. You can interpret that in any way that you like. But to pretend that what these people have is in any way similar to an actual family or an actual loving, committed relationship is just depreciating. It's disrespectful. But this story was back in December. Now the baby has been born, and in late March, then we find out that this Ethan guy was arrested for what we discussed earlier. And I'll read to you the article really quickly. Ethan Baucom is charged with aggravated child abuse after a 5-week-old girl suffered multiple injuries, police said. A 22-year-old Westside Jacksonville man told an officer he, quote, needed to tell the truth on March 17th, according to his arrest report. While while much of the report about Ethan Bishop Baucom's charge of aggravated child abuse has been redacted, one line is not. Quote, he stated he believed he heard a pop during the occurrence, the officer wrote in the report. The 5-week-old girl's grandmother gave more details in an email to the Times-Union, saying the baby suffered a broken leg, arm, ribs, and skull fractures. Quote, I am so distraught that words cannot describe, the grandmother said. Oh, the horror of all of this. I am so overwhelmed with pain, heartache, and sorrow over this. She said the baby is expected to recover without any permanent damage. Baucom remains behind bars on a $250,000 bail, according to jail records. The investigation began on March 15th when officers were called to Wolfson's Children's Hospital about a baby with broken ribs, injuries to her lungs and liver, and, quote, multiple brain bleeds, the arrest report said. The First Coast Child Protection Team's examination concluded that the baby had been physically abused with, quote, a minimum of 3 attacks. On March 17th, the baby's mother called the Florida Department of Children and Families, saying she believed Baucom had possibly injured the child while he was babysitting on March 12th. The report said. She said Baucom told her he had squeezed the child. Baucom told the responding detective that he was getting frustrated due to his inability to get any sleep while babysitting. At some point, something happened that was blacked out in the report, and that's when he said he heard the pop. Then the baby briefly ceased crying, then cried harder, he said. So obviously this guy is evil and he deserves everything that the justice system and his fellow prisoners will do to him. But now I want to talk about how common this type of behavior is in non-traditional households and why it happens. And the first thing that I think is important to realize is that this type of behavior is not uncommon for animals. Male primates are known to do this to infants who are not their own. And I don't think that this explains all of it, but I don't think that it's nothing. I don't think that it's insignificant. I think that it's extremely important to recognize that people, especially men, will often become violent towards children that are not theirs because they don't have a protective instinct for them because they're not their children. And to this you might say, well, what about adoptive parents? And that's a great point, but adoption is different from cohabitation because adoptive parents want the child. These guys just want the woman for whatever reason. They don't even want each other there, let alone a child. They're all competing for the woman's attention and affection. And so for Ethan, who remember was the first to speak up about jealousy, for him, this child represented that jealousy. This child represented another man with his woman. She was literally the result of that. The child was created that way, so that probably made him significantly more apathetic towards the well-being of that child than would be normal for non-biological people, or even hostile towards the child. And this is crystal clear in the data. We know that in all circumstances, but specifically with abuse and general well-being right now, we know that the nuclear family is best for children and that abuse rates only climb as the family structure becomes more deviant. A study in Britain found that children of a cohabitating mother were 33 times more likely to suffer abuse than children living with their biological parents. You've got a study published in the Journal of Pediatrics that found that children who live in households with unrelated adults are 50 times more likely to die from inflicted injuries than those living with their biological parents. We know that children in a household with their mother and her boyfriend are about 11 times more likely to be sexually, physically, or emotionally abused than children living with their married biological parents. Also, they're 6 times more likely to be physically, emotionally, or educationally neglected than children living with their biological parents. Cohabitation is also associated with other non-fatal pathologies, among children. I mean, a study from the Urban Institute found that 15.7% of 6 to 11-year-olds in cohabitating families experience serious emotional problems such as depression, feelings of inferiority, stuff like that, compared to just 3.5% of children in families headed by married, biological, or even adopted parents. And all of these statistics are applicable, and then some, because there's a child, there's the child's mother, there's the child's biological father, they're not married, and then there's 3 other non-related men who have jealousy issues about their relationship with the mother, and probably the fact that the child isn't theirs. This is one of the worst possible environments for a child to grow up in, and that was reflected by the actions of one of the boyfriends. But we can't pretend that it doesn't make sense, like it follows the pattern. Non-monogamy leads to child abuse, it leads to pedophilia, it leads to all sorts of weird fetishes, and the reason for that is that they're all symptomatic of one thing, which is a perverted individual with no self-control. So they divorce intimacy and responsibility from sex to satisfy their physical desires, and because of that, there's therefore nothing principally wrong with incest or pedophilia or even harming others. You might know that it's wrong to harm others, but when you're so used to only focusing on what makes you feel good and what you want, it's a lot easier to ignore that and continue down the rabbit hole. So, of course, the result is broken families and a broken child, literally. This guy tried to break this child because he's a small, pathetic man whose lack of self-control made him into a gross, overweight loser, and I hope that when he's in jail being polygamously shared with the other inmates, that he takes a moment to reflect that the absolute peak of his romantic career was sharing this woman with 3 other dudes. Hey guys, if you like this video, that's great. Always a lot of work on my end, and if you can get some enjoyment from it, that's enough for me. But while you're here, While I have your attention, you could also leave a thumbs up, leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications so you get notified when I post, share the video with friends. All suggestions. I know you're still here. I look at the analytics. Something like 20% of you stick around until the very end. So I know you're watching, and I'll know whether or not you actually do the 5 things that I just listed. So just know that. But thank you so much for watching, and may God bless America.